Thank you, thank you. Hello, hello, hello. Good evening. My name is Lauren Pacheco, and I'm a creative director with Chicago Humanities. Well, tonight's program, a retrospective on musician Charles Joseph Smith, will be in conversation. That's right, woohoo! And he will be in conversation with staff writer at the Chicago Reader, Leor Galil. Before I introduce our next person to introduce officially the program, I just want to say this week we fully launched the spring season. So if you haven't grabbed one of these green program printed guides up front, please get one. Check out all the program that we have planned that goes through the month of June. And you can also check out the full lineup at chicagohumanities.org. Now, you are not here to see me talk up here. Let me go ahead and introduce co-founder of Sooper Records, Glenn Curran, to the stage.
Hello, thank you all for being here. Before we turn to the discussion and Q&A with Charles and Leor, I want to give Charles a brief introduction, and then we're going to watch a short video clip. Of course, the definitive version of Charles' life story, for the definitive version of Charles' life story, I encourage you to pick up a copy of his remarkable autobiography, available for sale back there, called The 88 Keys That Opened Doors. Charles Joseph Smith was born on Chicago's South Side in 1970 to Joseph and Emma Smith. He lived his earliest years in Inglewood before his parents bought a house down the road in Beverly in 1973, where Charles lives to this day. Both of his parents were college professors, Joseph a mathematician and Emma a professor of writing and literature. They were a proud family, accomplished, successful, involved with, and known in their community. Their eldest son, Stanley Smith, Charles' late brother, died from a tragic and freak asthma attack on the campus of U of I Urbana-Champaign shortly before Charles would matriculate there. Emma and Joseph were very much raising Charles and Stanley to be a dynamic duo, each brother his other's keeper, instilling within them the importance of looking out for one another. Instead, Charles would go on to carry the Smith family flag alone, as he has done now for all these decades. Charles was mute for several years as a child. He would eventually be diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder and faced many challenges. He would work extremely hard for many years to come to terms with ASD, to understand it, and ultimately gain control over it. Key to that was his music. Though young, silent Charles had long been drawn to the sights and sounds of music, movies, and popular culture, it would be his own discovery of his talents as a pianist that would dramatically change the trajectory of his life. His older brother Stanley had been taking piano lessons for 2 years, and nobody realized it, but the whole time, Charles was watching and listening to Stanley practice. He would thumb through the sheet music when nobody was around. Then one day, Charles, having never touched or played the piano in any meaningful way or received any training, played the piece that Stanley had been rehearsing without any sheet music. It totally freaked out everyone in his family. But he had figured it out. Music was the key. And he found that key all by himself. Emma and Joseph recognized this immediately and aggressively supported him in his piano studies from that moment forward. Charles would go on to study with numerous celebrated piano instructors, receive many awards and accolades throughout his teens and 20s at recitals and competitions. He would earn 3 degrees and perform as a concert pianist in 5 countries, including the United States, France, Germany, Italy, and Hungary. Between 1990 and 1994, Charles earned his bachelor's in piano from Roosevelt University, and between 1994 and 2002, Charles earned both his master's in music and his doctor of musical arts from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, where both his parents and his brother had attended. Henceforth, he would be known as Dr. Charles Joseph Smith. Charles's first experience with DIY, or the underground, occurred in 1990, in his early years at Roosevelt. He attended a house music event at a juice bar called Alcatraz in Chicago's Greektown neighborhood after seeing a flyer in the halls of Roosevelt University. It was there that he got down to Lil Louis' French Kiss and learned that there were places he could go and dance and be around people who liked music as much as he did, where he could be himself, where he could be free. Charles has said that the DIY spaces that he loves most are the ones that he perceives as having the most freedom. He would go to some other DIY events both in Chicago and in Urbana, but while in college, he was mostly focused on his studies with the piano. Charles's career as an artist has at least 2 defined eras. The first era was that of Charles the classical concert pianist. From his earliest gig as a kid playing accompaniment in church to the recitals and competitions in the great halls of music academies in Europe, Charles's first era was defined by the pursuit of technical perfection and mastery of the classical canon. He played piano nearly every day for hours a day for 20 years. By the end of college, Charles was an elite and accomplished concert pianist with a refined and virtuosic technique that was hard-earned. But after he left college in 2002, opportunities to become a touring concert pianist or a music teacher, either of which would have been acceptable to him, were hard to come by. He says in part it was difficult to find opportunities because of the way he presented socially, given his ASD. He would, however, find regular work doing piano accompaniment at churches around Chicago and also accompaniment for vocal teacher Andrew Schultz, whom Charles met at Roosevelt. He connected years later after college with Andrew and would work with him as an accompanist at Chicago's Fine Arts Building for 23 years. He still works with Andrew today. In his second era, Charles pushed further into Chicago's DIY underground. There he made friends, performed, danced some more, and through sheer persistence established himself as a fixture across multiple generations of subcultural music makers and artists over the last 20 years. Charles's original music and his compositional voice would evolve dramatically and flourish in this second era. Charles recently told me about this second era. No more piano teachers, no more college juries, no more mandatory lecture recitals. So I was free. He was influenced by everything he saw and heard: punk, noise, dance, the avant-garde, electroacoustic music, experimental electronics, Japanese Butoh, concept-driven art of all sorts. Notably, he would also begin to more deeply explore narrative elements in his original work: performance art, opera, storytelling, poetry, musical theater. Despite having rather limited recording and performance resources, Charles became a one-man show, sometimes performing under different aliases, including Mr. Fourfinger or Lamar Linden. Charles's DIY performances are often sketches of a bigger production or concept in his mind. Indeed, he recently told me, if I am performing on stage, I try to do stuff to the best of my ability and add some of my music, dance, and songwriting skills to make it more effective. In this second era, Charles would make his original music at home and burn it to CDs. For 25 years, he would sell his original music and literary works around Chicago, hand to hand, wherever he went. We at the label cataloged 64 unique CD releases from Charles, but that's just what he still had available. He would write 3 books, including his autobiography and a 2-part series on his experiences in Chicago DIY. He would attend numerous shows a week, sometimes numerous in the same night. He still does this. In addition to knowing countless people in the city's music, arts, dance, and literary communities, his ubiquity transformed his reputation. Charles is considered and known by many as a living symbol of the power of music and the spirit of beloved community at the heart of Chicago DIY. He is Chicago's virtuosic genius underdog, or as Leor Galil recently wrote, the savant of the basement show. In 2024, Sooper Records began the process of archiving Charles's original music, resulting in the 90-minute album Collected Works and War of the Martian Ghosts. The first part, Collected Works, features 10 original compositions spanning many genres. And the second part of the album contains 2 realizations of Charles's evolving sci-fi opera, War of the Martian Ghosts, for which he has ambitions to one day stage as a full operatic production. It is the definitive collection of his recorded music to date, though it would be impossible to ever capture the galaxies of music, poetry, and prose penned by the prolific Dr. Charles Joseph Smith. Today, we are honored to be joined by Chicago music journalist and staff writer at the Chicago Reader, Leor Galil. Leor has written about Charles's music and books across many years. And before we jump into a conversation with Charles and Leor, we have prepared a short video clip about the life of Dr. Smith.
My name is Charles Smith. I was born and raised in Chicago, Illinois. I started out as a classical composer. BM and piano at Roosevelt U. MM and DMA, it was at the University of Illinois School of Music. I performed at the French Piano Institute. Ibla Grand Prize in Ragusa, Ibla, Italy. Budapest, the Rush School of Music Summer Piano Festival. And now I incorporate jazz, anthems, all that stuff. I incorporate avant-garde, postmodern, post-romantic, retro-romantic, computerized music. So I'd call it eclectic, I think. I've done several books that focus on Chicago's DIY scene. There was one flyer that announced the DIY show in Pilsen, and that's how I got hooked. At that point, I realized there was a string of DIY hangouts. The Bakery, Junior's Bar, the Corporal, Cafe Mustache. I loved that so much. I still love Cafe Mustache. They had punk bands, avant-garde, lo-fi. Wow, it was, wow. I realized there was a noise punk band that I loved, King Songs. I'm willing to put it on. House music was starting to explode in Chicago. They had b-boy contests, classic techno and rave, the Buteau dance community, another subset of DIY, Latin house, even some merengue. So they had nearly the kitchen sink. In 1974, I stopped talking. And I did not even say a single word until about August 1976. That was about 5 and a half. There is a severity scale. 3 is the worst. 0 is virtually no autism. At that point, it was 2.8. Despite the challenges, I wanted to be as normal as I could. I used music as like sort of an escape. It started with playing the piano, I think. It's just, I've been exposed to top 40. My mom made me listen to classical music. I was just tickling the keys on the piano. It had like something like a sort of a gift. 1979, it came full bloom. It's like a geranium that starts out in a weak bloom in about 4 or 5 years, and then finally a bloom comes in.
of the piano. And we ask for your undivided attention, Charles Smith.
We're going to do a Q&A with Leor and Charles, followed by an audience Q&A, and then Charles will play a few pieces he's prepared for us. So welcome to the stage, Leor Galil and Dr. Charles Joseph Smith.
You guys were in for a treat earlier. Those of us who were around for the sound check were, I think I can say, pretty blown away by what Charles did just in that very brief period of time. So thank you, Charles, for doing this. Thank you for being here. Thank you all for being here. I'd like to start with actually the new box set, Collected Works and War of the Martian Ghosts. Do you mind just telling us how that came to be and what that means to you? You've accomplished so much. What does this new collection mean?
So I also gave away some free pics, what would be slides, graphic art slides of a bit of what it is all about. But it started when 2017 when Glenn, and I were doing a recording on January 2nd. And we were doing about 8 hours of recording at an old studio, probably of his. And then, after about 8 hours, the first 10-track War of the Martian Ghosts album was released. And then it got its big debut at the Hideout on February 17th. And it was almost sold out. That's just as important. But I realized that the titles that were given the 10 tracks were given probably by Glenn, and I just probably the way that the music sounds. So what these 10 title names. I was trying to figure out if is it possible to not make it this tape about maybe 30 minutes of material into a full-fledged opera. So I started just before the pandemic. I started to add arias, music, songs, and I was trying to follow the script of the 10 tracks that were named by the producer or the. So, for example, Welcoming Ceremony, which is track 2, or actually, but fortunately, track number 4, War of the Martian Ghosts, well, or maybe 5, did not change. So I had planned that they do have like something like a sort of like a fight scene at the end of Act 1. So because it's going to be track 5, track 6 would be like side 2, if I'm guessing. So my plan was I was going to try to produce this War of the Martian Ghosts at the Hideout, but it was derailed when the pandemic struck. But it was just, but I had an idea. Like I wasn't. Part of it was inspired by Mars Attacks, the movie released in 1995. So I've watched a fair amount of Star Wars, and I was inspired by John Williams' beautiful music. And some other sci-fi movies I've watched were good too. So at that point, the Starship Troopers was also another inspiration. So when the pandemic hit, I took advantage of the lockdowns, stay-at-home orders, to complete the whole shebang. The whole shebang, which was called War of the Martian Ghosts, and then so I added some music that I was supposed to be like to show my eclectic side. So in the overture, I add a ballroom samba introduction because I grew up with ballroom dancing in the 1990s. The ending is also a samba. And then the final thing that inspired the opera was watching Apollo 13. Because there's a scene involving a blast off from Earth to Mars where the battle happens. And I realized that I was like a little bit schooled on space science by watching Apollo 13, the film. So I also watched the space shuttle flights, all this stuff, and then and how they blast off and do all these procedures for mission control and all that stuff. So as the opera was going to be like, when I finished it, I realized I had to make some changes. Yeah, so I did most of it's piano reduction, right? I also added some orchestral things too, if I wanted a full-fledged orchestra and all this stuff. So, but the one thing that caused this is I was doing an improv. I think it was 1997. I was using a PC-88 Warhorse type of digital piano synth, PC-88, and I patched it to what's called Synth Effects 1. That's the patch name. I used the Mastertracks Pro sequencer along with a Performance 635 Mac computer with that keyboard, and I did an improv on this palette that had space sounds, Martian sounds, and I did that for 4.5 minutes. And I saved it as a MIDI file and I called it War of the Martian Ghosts. But this is the backtrack that happened. But maybe about 18 minutes later, I think. 20 years later, when when Glenn started that first recording of that, then things really lifted off.
I remember we were in the studio and Charles was recording a bunch of piano pieces. This was back in 2017, and all of the titles for the pieces he was playing had these very straightforward titles: a little samba in E minor, etude in B flat. And then Charles looked at me and the engineer Dylan Piscula, who were there, and said, "Okay, this next one is called War of the Martian Ghosts," and unleashed a thundering atonal, through-composed piano piece, and it sort of took off from there.
And
you've written a whole opera now that you want to stage, correct?
Yeah. I want to produce it because everything is done. I just need to. Yeah, everything is done. I just need to produce it. Well, so I was trying to think of if donation could probably do that, could be the place to do that, because I love. This is my most favorite of all DIY places. Even right now, I love that DIY place. Because I actually saw an experimental opera performed at that place about 4 or 5 years ago. Maybe. It's just, I don't know what the name of that opera was, but it was, I didn't even know. And it has enough space, and I realized it's sort of a stretch to do. I was trying to be like almost everything. But it's not easy to be everything when you are trying to produce an opera.
Fair enough. Let's go to the very beginning. Glenn talks about this moment, and you wrote about it in your autobiography about the first time that you sat down and played piano. How did it feel to start playing music after that moment? What did that specific you learning and your family learning that you had this ability to play so well do for you?
On the mother's side of the family, especially Emma, my mother, and her siblings afterward, starting in Mississippi, wanted to have a piano as an escape. So their family the mandate for that mother side of the family was to learn piano. And that's how my mother played church hymns before she couldn't do it because of her mobility issues. But she was involved with the church so much. It just had been, but hymns were the only things that she could do. Even my father, Joseph, actually was trying to play piano at that point, but it was just not easy to, it's not easy to do at that point. But, it was my brother, that started all this growth in my music, all that. He was trying to play piano, and I was seeing the sheet music for the first time. And at that point, I never had piano lessons. And I even tried to play some sheet music, but I think Stan learned like without piano lessons before we took piano lessons maybe about 2 years after, about 1975. So sheet music included top 40, like for example, like things like Feelings or The Way We Were, or soft ballads, things, mainly things like that. Songs of the 70s that people that my parents grew up with. So things like So at that point, WGN 7 Radio 720 was their escape, especially my mother, where they had a variety of music programs. I didn't know they had a classical program called Music Unlimited in the 1970s. That's how I got exposed to the first classical songs and all that. And and even some classical music on TV. And so but this was almost like the this gave me like the sufficient enrichment of music to like take piano lessons. But the autism side of this, well, was quite like unusual, and that about 2 or 3 years after I got diagnosed, I started my first piano lessons, and just like in less than a year, I was on my way to like being almost like Emily Bear. Emily Bear is now world famous now, and ironically, Emily Bear was taught under the same teacher who died regrettably, but he was very strict. Emilio Del Rosario, a Philippine pianist who immigrated to America. And I didn't mention any other interviews at that point about Emily Bear, and I realized Emily Bear's gift is much faster than my gifts. I don't know if Emily's gifts came from having ASD. I don't know if she had ASD, but it was probably like the prodigy like effect, not ASD. But so I respect Emily Bear's like rise to musical stardom, and fortunately, my life and my start at piano lessons and all that, and even performing, was a bit like Emily Bear's. And one more thing, 2010, in a group concert, maybe involving Emilio Del Rosario, Emily Bear and I, and about 8 or 10 other students of Emilio, I think, were in a piano recital at the Fine Arts Building. So, and Emily Bear played the first prelude of Gershwin, and she was very, very good. Wow. And I did not even know that Emily would like be almost like I am right now. I am, but I wish I had had like the success earlier than Emily Bear's is now.
The subtitle of your autobiography, The 88 Keys That Opened Doors, the subtitle specifically talks about how piano helped you overcome the challenges posed by autism spectrum disorder. What specific challenges posed by ASD did music help you overcome or deal with?
So that now at the beginning, when I heard the first musics, it was almost like an enemy to me. For example, 60s funk drums, caused me to melt down. And I did, that was just, I not because I couldn't even process those fast drums. I didn't know how to read a drum chart. I didn't know how to even play drums. This was way, so that's how ASD almost destroyed my music career in my post-toddler years. But as soon as I read my first notes in the piano lessons, read the first music staff, all this stuff, and learned the basics of music, know structure, sequence, instruments, all that, I realized that music was not as terrifying than those funky drums that made me scared when my younger years. And I realized that music was also an escape. It's also an escape from my social deficits, even my communications deficits too sometimes. It's just because I realized that, and I was dealing with a conservative world, and where there's like there's like conservative form in everything I do or say or even move. And regrettably, the awkwardness and the bizarre traits that come from ASD, well, I had to deal with that by using like music as a sort of escape. I realized that music has structure, so it helped me like gain like something like how things can be structured, so I don't go into chaos, and how music can be like a bit of a story, like. Well, usually most compositions have a beginning, middle, and end, almost like a novel. And I realized that when I got exposed to operas, like watching like La Boheme on PBS or so things like that, or listening to opera on the radio, things like that. I realized that music like can help me organize things too, like figure out. And so I had listening deficits from ASD, so I realized that listening to music or even performing music helps improve maybe my listening skills, maybe my math skills, but I cannot promise you or even confirm that but I heard studies that it could be, but just and I realized that ballroom dance, when I got exposed to ballroom dance I got exposed to a lot of musics that styles ranging from mambo to samba to waltz and all that. I realized that I could make friends through music, and at one point when I was in my graduate years, my first few years in graduate school, I was watching a ballroom competition in college. It was too intimidating to me. But not until I saw a Fred Astaire book in my house. My dad got it. I got being interested in dance. I realized that music can help, like with my dance ability, and that it helped me a great deal. So it sounds like a win-win situation. So
Charles is also an accomplished dancer who's won dance competitions. Not a thing that
I can't. Well, regrettably, I have to correct myself that I didn't win every dance competition.
Fair enough. Yeah.
I was especially in ballroom competitions. I did not. I was eliminated even before making semifinals or even finals. Yeah, I have been finalist in a few of these dance categories in ballroom competitions. So, but I got first place in tango in 2006 or 7 during what's it called the Cyclone Ballroom Classic in Iowa State University. That was the first time I ever got first place in the international standard, or they call modern, category. It's just, and I love the Latin dances, especially international. And I knew that international standard would be challenging. It sounds like playing a long, difficult piango. So.
Charles is known for dancing in the DIY scene. I mean, I've seen you before we even met. I saw you dancing.
So I realized that since I realized that music and dance are married, sometimes even in places where there's not ballroom dancing. There's like DIY places that don't do ballroom dancing, like punk, noise, avant-garde, things like that. I can adjust my dancing to that, and sometimes I can incorporate new creative improv movements, creative movement, and so you probably know I had been in a bit of been involved in Chicago's Butoh dance community. Well, it's a type of Japanese performance art dance that was supposed to portray the walking wounded of the Japanese during the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So that point, the two founders of Butoh and did their observed that and then became what's called the Dance of Darkness, Onkoku Butoh. I don't do too much Butoh performances right now because I have been so busy with especially with this release. So I'm also a little bit of a risk taker in DIY when I do dancing. So I am a bit afraid of mosh pits, but I was doing a lot of modified pogo dancing to correlate with the slam dancing. I even took the chance of colliding with dancers in mosh pits, but I knew I had to be careful, or otherwise I would have broke a toe, or if I fall down, I would break an elbow, things like that. That just so I try to keep away from when I do mosh pits. I don't go too much in the center unless I actually absolutely have to, and I usually try to go away from mosh pits, but I realized that even if you try to back away from a mosh pit, you will. I realize you could still get crushed.
That's good life advice. Stay away from mosh pits.
So many of Charles's friends.
I know I cannot stop a mosh pit because it's unavoidable in the punk subculture. So I do stage diving. No, I'm too afraid to do stage diving. No. Yeah, I've seen stage diving before. But I'm afraid I was going to hit my head. But no. So
speaking of subculture, you talk about music providing structure in a conservative world.
Yes.
With DIY, you also mentioned how the freedom of it really opened your eyes. How did you find DIY, and what's kept you involved all these years?
I see show bills from in my college years, and sometimes they announce things like a rave or a house show or punk show. Sometimes it's those show bills are black and white. Sometimes these show bills are colored, and sometimes it's I realized that there's a thing called word of mouth. That's one of the word of mouth techniques in DIY is putting up show bills. And so I realized that's what they traditionally do for but if please repeat the question, please.
What's kept you involved in DIY all these years? What attracted you to it?
So I realized mainly it's no holds barred things, like for example the mosh dancing, slam dancing. There's I've seen punksters shout out cuss words, that some others do screamo. Sometimes they destroy drum sets and things like that. Sometimes they run into audiences and like that. But I realized that, and sometimes it's crowded. And sometimes when I went to the Ottoman Empire, it's no longer around, the house venue, and I realized it could be wall-to-wall people in only about 400 square feet of space, and you have virtually no room to move. And unfortunately, it's not like the wall of death. Well, no. But it's a teeny bit like a wall. Definitely try to move from side to side. But it's definitely, yeah. I was introduced to yeah, I was introduced to death metal through like the Fuzzy Bunnies of Death and Connie Olivia, this no holds barred trans person, was even crazier than I.
Someone sent me a photo of Charles just a couple of weeks ago. They took the photo that night of Charles just doing a full-on headstand at a noise show, just right in the middle of the dance floor.
So here's why. I was interested in things like capoeira, which involves like things like some tumbling, some evasion moves, things like that. Running moves, spin moves, but I also have learned like from like seeing hip hop in action. I've seen like battles, b battles, b girl battles, b boy battles. I've seen like people spinning the 2x2s. I've seen like people doing freestyle stuff, but I realized that and I also realized that yoga also has handstands, so it's much, even though it's like more of an exercise like style than hip hop does. It's just so the reason why I do that. I was trying to impress the crowd at that point, even though I did that handstand, and it's more of a headstand. I'm 55 and some people don't have the ability to do that anymore.
I don't.
Yeah, I do not.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm trying to do some I know I have to exercise, or otherwise I'm going to lose my what I currently have now. So I'm trying to keep on doing it until I say I can't do it anymore. It's just.
Before we open things up to the audience, I see you've brought some material. Do you want to show us what the?
Yes, sir. So this is May 1st, 2000, where I was featured in the Daily Illini. I was about 30 years young, I think. 29 years young, and it was it was like almost like a sort of a joy of like being like almost in the front page. And I was in the 4th year of graduate school. And a lot of, even the Chambana community, the university community, like adored my artistic talents and all that stuff in there.
You're right up there with Ebert, by the way. I don't know if anyone can see that back there.
So let me see. I think I ran out of things to make.
That is the front page, yeah. Well, is now time to open things up to the audience. Do folks have questions for Charles? We got one over here.
Microphone. Okay. Charles, you talked about how your being autistic, how that's challenging and how music helped you with that. I'm wondering if you could talk about how being autistic maybe helped your music. Like one of the traits of autism is like seeing patterns or something like, I don't know, but.
So sometimes, Mozart, I don't know if Mozart had ASD. I don't know if Chopin had ASD, but I realized that, it's just, when I was diagnosed, I didn't know anything about patterns. I didn't recognize even anything in the ink blot stuff that I was given in the ASD battery of tests. I just didn't even know. It was like, so my brain was actually rewired to like notice patterns, but I had to hear music like maybe at least 4 or 5 years like after onset of diagnosis to recognize that there were patterns, there were stops, there were beginnings, there were middles, there were ends, and things like that. But it took about maybe 7, 9, 8, maybe 5, 7, 8 years. Even if with my gifts, there were some struggles because I was miswired in like information on even music. It's just So as soon as I could see patterns, that's how I started to play piano, and I started to try to put my hand in composing. So that's when it's, but it was not easy to do because I was thinking of patterns and but it took like some rewiring for about 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 years after I played piano to get the composition side down. I just think.
Great question. Do you have other questions in the audience? Over there.
Hi, Charles. What role does improvisation play in your musical experience and also just in composing music?
So I realized that well, you learn from seeing musical notation. So I had been I've been trained in traditional Western music notation and learning scores from left to right. And I after maybe several years at least, after playing doing some piano training at least for 5 or 7 years, I was able to learn the left and right things of how music is structured and all that. Being exposed to classical music so much helped me to get the classical improvisation down. But when I was exposed to jazz, it took maybe about additional year to 2, to get my own style improvisation down, even with my classical background, because I realized because I realized the style of jazz is you have to syncopate hard and frequently, and that's why it's a little bit hard to do that, and you have to do change of chords quickly, and it's not easy to do. It's I still need it. So I still need. I know about 100 songs in the jazz fake books, but I know I have a lot to do. And in other musics, especially when Renee Baker introduced me to non-music notation, known as graphic notation, I challenged myself to playing piano using Renee Baker's unique form of graphic notation, where there's no notes, it's just like drawings, patterns, shapes, no notes. And I think when I played them, for Renee Baker, who is a really renowned composer, violist, musician, I think I succeeded about 85 to 90% of the time. So I realized that not only I can read music notation, I can perform non-music notation, graphic notation. I can do that and even improvise on whatever graphic notation there is. And this came especially from my classical background.
Amazing. I believe I saw another question, a hand up over there.
Yeah, one of my favorite tracks on the album is an 8-minute piano improvisation from Charles.
Hi, Charles. I've enjoyed seeing you perform a number of times at open mics at the Gallery Cabaret over the years. And in the past couple weeks, it's just been great to learn more about you. A story that's really intrigued me is the first time you sat at a piano and played and astounded your parents. And we sort of got to hear maybe what went on through their head or reaction. But do you remember that moment and what was going on in your head when that happened?
So I realized that now, so when my mom did not have mobility issues, she would love to go see a performance, see me in a recital, see me in another recital and things like that. And my father was able to like see me perform at Ragusa Ibla. First time he went to Italy to see me perform at Ragusa Ibla. Fortunately, yeah. No. He was not there to see me perform at Ragusa. No. He saw me perform in France, so that's the good news. So it's well, he couldn't go to Italy. But at that point, well, unfortunately, my father died in 2002, and all that's left is my mother. So when my mother would go to like places like the Kroc Center. I performed about in the late 2000s decade because she wanted me to see me play because she wanted to hear what I sounded like. So it was good, but her mobility issues like kept her from like going to see like concerts live. So fortunately, she like had a chance to see me perform on streams and all that, and she is still proud of my performances right now, and she really appreciates what my accomplishments right now, not just the current ones, but the way in the past. But regrettably, it's a little bit hard for Mom to see me live and enjoy like performances like she wanted to go live that she used to. So it's a little bit disappointing for her that she is missing some of the joy of wanting to see me perform. And so it's still a challenge for her too.
Emma, Charles's mom, taught in Chicago City colleges along with his dad and encouraged Charles to write daily journals, and those were the basis for his memoir, which is incredibly detailed, and I highly recommend reading it if you get the chance. There's copies in the back. Do we have time for another question?
Yeah, one more.
One more question. I see a hand. What?
Okay, I was just wondering, you said that jazz was difficult, but are you a jazz fan, a jazz artist fan? Do you like to perform jazz?
All right. So it's well, I realize that jazz is not easy. It's even harder than classical to do. But I had to listen to a lot of jazz to just appreciate. So I listened to jazz like in the past, listening to WBEZ radio, and even when I went to Chicago State NYC, I realized there was a good jazz community in Chicago. Yeah, I can remember the years when Carolyn Davis was the go-to in Chicago's jazz community, regardless she moved to New York. She loved to collaborate with a lot of people, and I even danced with Carolyn Davis in front of one of her avant-garde ensembles that's no longer around. I remember that. Now I went to more jazz events in like the Hungry Brain. I love that. They do a lot of jazz there. And I also went to a fair amount of jazz festivals, especially the Hyde Park, and also the Millennium Park Jazz Festival to try to get used to the way they play jazz and all that. And the good news is I also got opportunities too. I remember going to jazz jams at the Whistler of the North Side. And I got a chance to play keyboards and all. So that's how regrettably, I'm not an all jazz artist. I'm a crossover. Yeah. So I could do improvisation. I could do the chords. I could do the runs, and yeah. So I could do the syncopation. So I'm a jazz artist, but honestly, I'm a mixed artist. I'm a classical artist. I'm a jazz artist too. And one more thing, being exposed to Gershwin, a lot of Gershwin, and I started to play Gershwin on the piano, really exposed me to the jazz idiom. So, and another thing I have to, I went to the Velvet Lounge and I realized how the jazz vibe in Chicago works. I went to the old Velvet Lounge, then the new Velvet Lounge, and I realized that, yeah, jazz is here to stay in Chicago. So I'm not done with jazz. I'm going to keep on playing.
Charles is also a frequent collaborator of Angel Bat Dawid, who's one of my favorite jazz musicians. Like tours internationally. He just performed as part of a massive ensemble she put together at the Harris Theater in February. And he appears on at least one of her recordings.
Played Jazz Fest with her once too.
Yeah, Angel told me that Charles is one of her favorite composers. Period. She's also quoted in the box set by Glenn. Glenn wrote the liner notes. I think that's it for the questions. Charles, thank you again for doing this. You're going to perform some numbers for us.
I'm going to start off by playing Chopin's most adored pieces, and not just most adored pieces, one of the most common pieces you may have heard in movies, on TV, everything like that. It's the Fancy Impromptu in C sharp minor. I think it's Opus 66, if I'm correct. C sharp minor. Yeah, Fancy Impromptu. Okay. Now, I'm going to be doing Franz Liszt now. A not so famous Hungarian Rhapsody, number 18 in F sharp minor. It's one of those late rhapsodies in Liszt's later years. It's not too long. It's about 4 minutes. No, 3.5 minutes. Now on to a sort of a strange composer, Heitor Villa-Lobos. Here's a sort of like a toccata etude called Polichinelle or Punch Down from his piano collection called Progenies of the Baby. And I'm going to do the last piece. I'm going to go into the last piece. We're going to throw back to the times of like what classical music is. Classical music, none other than Beethoven. This is the second movement of his Moonlight Sonata. Opus 27, number 2. So this is the scherzo movement, the second movement, not the famous first movement. It's lighthearted and it's quite short. Do we have time for encores? Okay. You want them? You'll get them. Here's a prelude in G sharp minor by Rachmaninoff. I think it's the Opus 32 number 12. No, Opus 32 number 11. Opus 32 number 12, I think.